The opening minutes of this video are missing. The event begins with this recording of Hall Johnson's "O Freedom," sung by Elvira Green's Spiritual Renaissance Singers of Greensboro. Diane Sayre, founder of the Schiller Institute New York City Chorus, introduces the other panelists. Elvira Green, former mezzo-soprano of the Metropolitan Opera. Robert Wilson, New York City pianist, composer, voice coach, and former organist at the Convent Avenue Baptist Church. And Dennis Speed of the International Schiller Institute. She also welcomes Gregory Hopkins, music minister of the Convent Avenue Baptist Church, and tenor soloist Everett Suttle. In her own presentation, Diane is describing the founding of the Schiller Institute New York City Chorus in 2014 in response to the unjust verdict in the case of Eric Garner and the threat of violence in New York City and the nation at that time. Diane organized, with the help of Dennis Speed and others, an impromptu sing-along performance of portions of Handel's Messiah in Manhattan. With no time to spare, Diane pulled together a chorus and issued an invitation for all people to come sing with us. But with no orchestra, Diane went to the sidewalks in front of Lincoln Center, flagging down anyone carrying instrument cases. Everett Suttle was tenor soloist, and Bob Wilson held the largely unrehearsed orchestra together from the digital keyboard, which was tuned to the proper Verdi tuning of 432 Hz, for which the Schiller Institute had campaigned since the late 1980s. Tragically, as the concert opened, news came that 2 police officers had just been shot in Brooklyn, sitting in their patrol car. The concert was dedicated to the sanctity of every human life, and so a collaboration began which has continued to this day. As the video starts in mid-sentence, Diane is describing the role that Bob Wilson had played independently in the campaign for the Verdi tuning. Mr. Wilson is pictured at the piano on the background image behind Diane as she is speaking. The image is from a memorial 9/11 concert in 2018 by the Schiller Institute Chorus.
I discovered that he was very familiar with the Verdi tuning because he had been an accompanist for Carlo Bergonzi and had been actually at, I think, something in Milan where he said representatives of the Schiller Institute came marching in demanding the Verdi tuning, and he'd become a big fan of that. So it was like meeting an old friend. We had Everett Suttle, the tenor soloist, who has been with us since the very beginning, and then grew from starting with very small beginnings to our peak, which was probably a collaboration with many choruses for the anniversary of the 100th birthday of Sylvia Lee, which we did with many churches, including Gregory's chorus at Convent Avenue Baptist Church. We had a chorus of about 220 people at Carnegie Hall, but it's now maybe 85 to 100 people. And we have been challenged with the pandemic, which I believe today we have now in the United States gone over the 500,000 mark of people who have died of this. So this music will be important to address that as well. But we have continued. We had decided for the year of Beethoven that we wanted to learn the Missa Solemnis. And hold on, I'm not quite sure why I'm getting a phone call right now. We would take this very ambitious task of learning Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, which we ended up having to do over Zoom. If you can imagine learning one of the most difficult choral pieces ever written, when the conductor cannot even hear the chorus, this is exactly what we have decided. My husband is harassing me as I'm speaking, demanding the Zoom link for this meeting. So if anyone can send it to him, that would be great. At any rate, we have done some virtual performances of that. People can see it in the on the chorus website, which is sinycchorus.com. Now, on the question of the spirituals, I had run into the organizers with LaRouche and the Schiller Institute when I was a student at New England Conservatory in Massachusetts. And my background was Quaker. I only learned actually after we were well into this process of the chorus in Washington, D.C., that my father had been the treasurer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and had been involved in sit-ins in Glen Burnie, Maryland. None of this did I know until years after I was married and had left the house. But this became known to me because Amelia Boynton Robinson, the legendary civil rights leader who led the march from Selma to Montgomery in Alabama and who was the host of Martin Luther King when he was there, had written a play in the 30s to raise funds for a community center. And the play may have been inspired by, or it came about the same time as Hall Johnson's Green Pastures, but it had 22 spirituals in it. And just because I had some musical training, I ended up agreeing to direct the chorus that would perform these spirituals. And I had sung a few now and then, but I didn't really fully appreciate the music. Sylvia Olden Lee began coming to these rehearsals, and she would sit with me tirelessly for months working on this music, and it really created in me a sense that it's something very precious and we could not lose this legacy. That was in the 1990s, and you're going to hear some coaching that she and Bill Warfield did later. But that became a very important part of our chorus in Manhattan, and I have really been privileged to get to work with some extraordinary musicians who will be with me here today, like Elvira Green, Bob Wilson, Everett Settle may have some things to say, Eugene Thaman Simpson, who helped us a lot, who was a collaborator, Paul Johnson. In 1994, the Schiller Institute, actually just after the death of Marian Anderson, began a project to revive the Dvorak National Conservatory of Music movement, or music as a movement, to revive this idea of the African-American spirituals, the Negro spiritual, as the basis for what he said could be a great and noble school of classical music, which was the project of Jeanette Thurber, inspired very much by Harry Burleigh and the important collaboration between Burleigh and Dvorak. I'm not going to say more about that now because I think it will be addressed as the discussion unfolds. What I wanted to do is to just read to you something which I found profoundly moving by William Dawson on the spiritual. And it's just excerpts from a record jacket, but really, I think can help. He writes, because
okay, to reschedule, you have to call the office at 410-955.
Write it down on a noise list.
Can we, someone mute everybody here? Now I'm unmuted, okay. Dawson writes, because of their unique appeal, the Negro religious folk songs have been subjected to a wide range of treatment.
She is muted here.
Sorry. At the hands of amateur and professional musicians who have undertaken to correct what were thought to be crudities and make them conform to conventional musical designs, with results which oftentimes have obscured their inspired beauty and done violence to their inherent reverence. Negro religious folk songs, as is true of all folk songs, are group expressions. They express the emotions and experiences of the Negro slave in the United States. They involve no individual composer or poet. To interpret them properly, one must become familiar with the conditions and circumstances which gave birth to them. It is equally important to study the characteristics of the music itself, to catch the mood and feel of it, in order to express adequately the sentiments that it embodies. Removed as we are from the times and conditions which gave birth to this music, it is impossible to sense the mood expressed in their melodies and natural harmonies, or to grasp the form and content of their words without first becoming familiar with the background of their creation. They have sometimes been called sorrow songs because they reflect the cruelties suffered at the hands of masters and overseers, and the agonies and torment of the soul which these cruelties produced. Two passages taken from antebellum archives will give the reader some idea of what American slavery meant to the Black man, introduced here to give vividness and authenticity to this analysis of the meaning of religious folk music of the Negro, properly called spirituals. One is taken from an act of the legislature of South Carolina in 1741, apparently intended to put a curb on the torturing of slaves. Quote, "In case any person shall willfully cut out the tongue, put out the eye, castrate or cruelly scald, burn, or deprive any slave of any limb or member, or shall inflict any other cruel punishment other than by whipping or beating with a horsewhip, cowskin, switch, or small stick, or by putting irons on, or confining and imprisoning such slave, Every such person for every such offense shall forfeit the sum of 100 pounds current money, unquote. The second passage is taken from an address by Henry Berry before the House of Delegates in Virginia in 1832. Quote, "Pass as severe laws as you will to keep these unfortunate creatures in ignorance. It is in vain, unless you can extinguish the spark of intellect which God has given them. Let any man who advocates slavery examine the system of laws that we have adopted toward these creatures, and may he shed a tear upon that, and would to God, sir, the memory of it might thus be blotted out forever. Sir, we have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light might enter their minds. We have only to go one step further to extinguish the capacity to see the light, and our work would be accomplished. They would then be reduced to the level of the beast of the field, and we should be safe. And I am not certain that we would not do it if we could find out the necessary process, and that under the plea of necessity," unquote. These excerpts give deep and poignant meaning to the words of the spiritual familiar to most Americans, "Nobody knows the trouble I see." With such a background, we marvel at the lack of a single word of hate in the religious folk songs of the Negro. In the midst of inhumanity, he sang, "Lord, I want to be a Christian. I want to be like Jesus." In these songs, one can hear the cry for deliverance and freedom which lurks behind every measure, because the Negro literally poured his heart into them. Besides suffering, slavery brought to the Negro the story of Jesus. In that story, the slave found the counterpart of his own tragic experiences and instantly claimed the hero of that epic drama for his own, which gives meaning to the oft recurring "My Jesus" in these songs. The slave identified himself with the Savior of all mankind, whose travail and triumph became the hope and assurance of his own deliverance. Thus, religion became the medium for expressing the slave's laments and aspirations for physical as well as spiritual release. So that's just an excerpt from what Dawson wrote. And finally, I'm just going to conclude and then turn it over to an example, a musical example, something from a paper by Mr. LaRouche written in the year 2000 called Politics as Art, where he reflects on Senator Eugene McCarthy holding poetry reading sessions and people making fun of it, and Abraham Lincoln studying Shakespeare, and the power of what he called the polished form of the Negro Spiritual, the collaboration of Burleigh and Dvorak. And at the very end, he says something which I think many of us can reflect on, especially in times where you try to say something and it doesn't come out exactly as you intended. He writes, "In such matters, what you think you are saying and the manner in which you say it may not agree. That should worry you. Therefore, you should refresh yourself, bathe your soul in classical poetry and song, that your mind might become better attuned and habituated to communicating in that relatively well-performed mode which classical art forms exemplify for your guidance. On this account, there is a precious lesson to be learned by all citizens and other residents of the United States, especially those oppressed by the ruinous policy trends of the past 35 years, from, among other relevant sources, the polished form of what is called the Negro Spiritual. So now what we're going to watch is an excerpt, about 10 minutes, of a master class from Sylvia Olden Lee, who people may be familiar with. I hope you are. She was the first African-American vocal coach or musician hired at the Metropolitan Opera Company, which is now itself in danger. She urged them to bring in a Black singer. Finally, Marian Anderson sang there. And she is joined by William Warfield, who was a board member of the Schiller Institute and a very accomplished baritone and also pianist, many people don't know, in his own right. And they are working with a young singer about probably 25 years ago in Texas on a spiritual by Hall Johnson, Couldn't Hear, no, Just Come From the Fountain. And I chose this because I think it really underscores the way, the care they take with this music, and to honor the intent of Hall Johnson underscores the classical nature of this music. Nothing is arbitrary, nothing is a mistake. Ms. Lee used to say that Hall Johnson didn't write one wrong note. So with that, we'll listen to this, and then immediately following that, we will hear from Dennis Speed.
You enjoy it and you love it, and the people obviously love it. I would only say to you, don't do it a tick faster. In fact, it could go a hair slower in tempo, according to Hall Johnson's taking me aside and telling me, you know, this is a happy thing. And that doesn't mean it's running off and you don't know what the syllables of the words are because you're getting so happy. It's happy. It could be done by a sort of disabled old lady. She comes in, I've just come from fountain. It's got to have the attitude in it, he said, and the way you take your breaths and express yourself. It isn't in the speed of it. He said, Sylvia, don't let them, this is the funniest thing I've heard. He coined a verb. Don't let them cutesy up my spirit. He did that. And through that way, he made me know he doesn't want that the speed does not make it. It's the bounce that it has. And that was his word, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Bill, he said bounce is to it. Be sure that, but your face, which you, when you announced, had her get up and share, and you acknowledged us. Let's clap again and see how when you sing, it goes dead. From the nose up, the eyes go out to lunch. This has got to go, you've got to show me that you know what you're talking about. Now, without her doing anything, you do Just Come From the Fountain. One hair slow with your Aunt Hattie, as my auntie said. Aunt Hattie's way of doing, she knew nothing about music or art. But when you, I've just come from, it's the enthusiasm. I've got to get enthusiasm from you. I won't have to do but about 4 bars without it. Just come from, and it's in your face. Let's go. Go. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. No, you said, oh, Lord, before you thought. That the expression of old never has any expression anyway. Sometimes it's before a sad song or whatever. But you've got to be on. When she does her intro for you, you're on. Now, that doesn't mean you kick up your heels, but you come to life and let us know that you know what you're going to say. All right, start without a comment.
Oh Lord, I just come
No,
from.
it's dead in the face. Look at that pretty face. And your face is filled with flames and dimples, and your eyes come to life. Why, when you sing, you take away everything from your face? Don't give us a mask. Go. Oh Lord, go.
Oh Lord, I just come from the fountain.
It's too fast. It has no bounce, and you trying to get through with singing. No. Do you understand? Now give me that smile. Oh Lord, folks out there, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters out here, I just tell them what you've done. From here over to here. Go. Oh Lord, go.
Oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. I just from the fountain,
Keep the
Lord.
smile.
I just come from the fountain. His name so sweet.
Now, would you say, Mr. Dr. Warfield, that she needs the bounce?
I didn't hear you.
The bounce needs to be.
Yeah, I think if you think in terms of using just, landing on just, that it will pull you back just enough so that it will get the bounce.
And the sound.
You say, oh Lord, I just come from, oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. Yes, from the fountain, Lord, I just come from the fountain. His name so that's what she's trying to get. Cassidy, do you love Jesus? Yes, I do love Jesus. Stop. Don't rush back into one. Leader, do you love Jesus? His name is so sweet. Oh Lord, it's that freedom that you have. Just
She doesn't have it.
just let it happen. Let it happen. I just got oh child, his name is so sweet.
When you do your asking these people, class, what's the first one? Paul Sinner. Find one out there. But you're not going to wait for them to answer. You're going to stop the quote and you answer for them. Then you do class leader. And what's the last one? Do you know what that is?
It's an elder in the community.
And he's in church, and he's the presiding elder of the church. And Hall left off the PRE, presiding elder. So you find him and you point to him. And then you step back and answer for him. Yes. Did you hear the enthusiasm he has? Yes. Now, if you stand up here and overdo, this is a lesson. If you overdo, we'll say, oh, honey, yeah, that's enough. You got too much. But do see it because you don't feel it yet, and you're still too fast. Will you start 1/10 of a degree? Start, come, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum.
Oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. I just from the fountain.
He gave you that lesson, and there's a bounce. Whether you do it visually or if it's on a tape, we should get it. I just come from that, and you'll do that. That's better already. Thank you, baby. Go.
Oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. I
Do something for me. I want you to do this. Oh Lord, I just and stop. Oh Lord, I just
Knees
stop. Stop. Do it.
Go.
Oh Lord, I just.
Oh Lord, I just.
Oh Lord, I just.
Now, oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. Let just start you off. That's it. Once more. Go ahead now and go on.
Oh, Lord.
Oh Lord, I just come from the fountain. I just.
You got to do that. Bending of the knee. Put your weight on the knee. And that'll keep you from going so fast. You still have, and I don't expect you to erase what you've learned this morning, but I want you to think about it. Didn't you hear? Oh, Lord. And you said, oh, Lord. Now, why can't you be enthusiastic? You can't wait to come in. Her intro is your feelings. Do it again. Name so sweet. Now find the poor sinner out there and point. His name said, his name so sweet. Oh, sinner, do you love Jesus? Yes, I do love my Jesus. Sinner, do you love Jesus? I want you to break between each one of these individuals. Poor sinner, poor sinner, do not poor sinner, do you? Please. And when you get to Zidnell, do you understand? Really get it in there. Are you beginning to feel it? Yes. All right, now accuse this person. Go. Poor sinner. I'll put it here. Somebody here in this part. Point to him. Go. Oh, sinner, do you? Go. Oh, sinner, go. Oh, sinner, do you? Oh, sinner, do it, sir. Do it.
She's trying to get you to stop after sinner before you say, do you love him? Poor sinner, do you love Jesus? That's what she's saying. Poor sinner, do you love him?
That's what you did.
Yeah, I know, of
course. Find them. Go. Oh, sinner, do you love Jesus? All right. Yes. And you've got to answer enthusiastically because it's a yes. You didn't say, no, I haven't found my way. Another one, right there. Poor sinner. Poor sinner, do you love Jesus? Yes, I do love my Jesus. Sinner, do you love Jesus? His name so sweet. Oh, Lord, I just come from the
Diane, I think you're muted.
Oh, well, I was saying Dennis Speed. Go ahead.
Okay, that's what you were saying. Okay. Well, let me first acknowledge that I understand that Gregory Hopkins has joined us. If people do not know who that is, Gregory Hopkins, a great tenor, has forgotten more about this topic than I will ever know. And that is not, there's no false humility in that statement. He's here with us. He worked with Sylvia for decades. It's important to make a statement like that in order to address the actual topic for which we are here gathered today. Because we have a job to do, which is to make that kind of instruction that you just saw universal again. And we're really engaged here in a spiritual exercise for which the Negro Spiritual is the vehicle. The Negro Spiritual has a relationship to America and indeed to world history, unlike any other musical form. It was used in Germany by the 1930s resistance against Hitler. It was used in South Africa in the days of apartheid. And of course, it was used by the American Civil Rights Movement extensively in the 1950s and 1960s. So it goes way beyond its origins in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century America. It is dynamic, it is universal, and it is all truly great poetry. Poetry is poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. That's a concluding sentence from Percy Shelley's In Defense of Poetry. And it's basically seen as a consummation devoutly to be wished, but clearly few people in the United States regard that statement to be more than a mere aspiration, a dream, rather than the truth. Just think about it. In order for that statement to be true, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, how could it be proven to be so? What is or what would be the pathway from poetry to legislation? You know, the constitution of the Athenian city-state, which was composed by Solon the lawgiver back in 594 BC, was actually a poem. Poet Friedrich Schiller wrote about Solon of Athens and about his giving the laws by means of his poetry, and made the statement that it is through beauty that one proceeds to freedom. Let's see if we can find a case in which that's actually shown. This is a painting that people have seen. It was done in 1650 by the Spanish painter Velázquez, and it's a painting of his assistant Juan de Pareja. Pareja was a slave. He had been a slave to Velázquez for about 20 years. But in Rome in 1650, Velázquez painted this portrait of Juan. Now, the excuse was that it was a practice painting for a painting that was to be done of the Pope, who had this exact same complexion. And when this painting was put on exhibit in a contest in Rome that year, Juan took the painting down by hand. It was acclaimed as not expressing merely art, but truth. It was because it was the true image of the true human being, Juan de Pareja. That same year, Velázquez freed Juan de Pareja. He gave him his papers that allowed him to become free. And that was in a Spain that had practiced the African slave trade at least as early as 1441 and only began abolishing it in 1811. The painting you're seeing here is a painting by Juan de Pareja called The Calling of Matthew. And if you think about what Velázquez actually did here, this is a case of unacknowledged legislation. He gives Juan de Pareja, the great painter, who is his assistant, his official freedom, but Juan de Pareja was already free. Juan placed himself directly in his painting of Christ. Here you see him on the far left, indicating the sacred calling that visual poetry, that is painting, represented as far as he was concerned. Marian Anderson's 1939 Easter Sunday concert at the Lincoln Memorial was another case of unacknowledged legislation. That wasn't her intention. That concert was actually organized by Eleanor Roosevelt and Walter White, then the head of the NAACP, and it was the embryonic future of another concert and demonstration that would occur 24 years later, called the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Martin Luther King's use of music in his visionary, impractical, impossible, but necessary Dream of America, the I Have a Dream speech, was not in the written plan of the speech, but it was requested of him by singer Mahalia Jackson on the spot. I Have a Dream would place the African-American tradition of the passionate declaration of faith, testifying, rooted in a tradition of preaching even more universal, and that Juan de Pareja had portrayed in his The Calling of Matthew, would place this tradition of preaching directly in the heart, in the consciousness, and the pathway of America for the very first time. And it's that which is the domain of the spirituals. We're now going to hear the great Robert McFerrin and Sylvia Olden Lee, and this is from a concert given at Bible Way Church in Washington, D.C. I think this was 1994. It was given on behalf of the Schiller Institute.
In the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me Jesus. Just about to break a day. Just about to break a day. Just about to break a day. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me You may have all this world. Give me
Let me just say that Mr. McFerrin was 74 years old at the time. He had had a stroke and he could not speak, but he could sing. So if you didn't believe what he was singing about before, you may want to think about it, given what I told you. We're going to go now to 4 selections. 2 of these are done by Everett Suttle, tenor, and then these 2 will be followed by, which will be Bill Warfield and Sylvia. And I'm going to ask at that point that Elvira Green might say a few things. I know she has a limitation on time. So I think we should go directly to those selections. And I think people will see the diversity in the selections and contrasting approaches to a form of preaching, again, testifying, that is characteristic of the African-American tradition. So we can go to those now.
save me.
and the sea stood still. Now ain't that a witness for my Lord? Ain't that a witness for my Lord? Ain't that a witness for my Lord? My soul is a witness for my Lord. Now there was a man of the Pharisees. His name was Nicodemus, and he didn't believe. The same came to Christ by night, wanted to be taught out of human sight. Now Nicodemus was a man, desired to know how a man can be born when he is old. Christ told Nicodemus as a friend, man, you must be born again. He said, born of man, if you wanna be wise, just repent, believe, and be baptized. Then you be a witness for my Lord. You be a witness for my Lord. You be a witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my Lord. You read about Samson from his birth, the strongest man that ever lived on earth. Oh, when I remember in ancient times, he killed 10,000 of the Philistines. Then old Samson, when wandering about, Samson's strength was never found out. Till his wife sat upon his knee, she said, tell me where your strength lies. Samson's wife, she talked so fair that Samson said, put on my hair, shave my head just as clean as your hand, and my strength will come just like a natural man. Cause Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson was a witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my Lord. There's another witness. Lord, there's another witness. And there's another witness. My soul is a witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my
Rowan Hayes wrote many arrangements of spirituals. One of the gargantuan works he did was a whole group of spirituals called The Life of Christ. And we're going to, Sylvia and I are going to sing two of these. The very first one, which is one of the few Christmas spirituals. Sister Mary had but one child, and we'll follow it with the account of Jesus in the temple when he was 12 years old. And we'll ask you not to applaud in between. Thank you.
Sister Mary had but one child, born in Bethlehem, and every time the baby cried, she'd rock him in the weary land. She'd rock him in the weary land. Oh, 3 wise men to Jerusalem came. They traveled very far. They said, where is he born? King of the Jews, for we have seen his star. King Herod's heart was heavy. He marveled, but his face was grim. He said, tell me where the child may be found. I'll go and worship him. I'll go and worship him. Sister Mary had but one child, born in Bethlehem, and every time the baby cried, she'd rock him in the weary land. She'd rock him in a weary land. An angel appeared unto Joseph and gave him this command. Arise, ye take your wife and child, go flee into Egypt's land. For yonder comes over Herod, a wicked man and bold. He's slaying all of the children from 6 to 8 days old. From 6 to 8 days old. Sister Mary had but one child, born in Bethlehem, and every time the baby cried, she'd rock him in a weary land. She'd rock him in a weary land. Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Sir, I'm only 12 years old. This little boy had to remember that he was born the 25th of December. Lawyers and doctors were amazed and had to give the little boy the praise. Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Sir, I'm only 12 years old. Lawyers and doctors stood and wondered as though they had been struck by thunder. Then they decided while they wondered that all mankind must come under. Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Sir, I'm only 12 years old. The last time the little boy was seen, he was standing on Mount Olivet Green when he dispersed all the crowd.
He entered up into a cloud. Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how old are you? Sir, I'm only 12 years
All right. Hard to talk after that. So let's go to Elvira, who I think is going to have to, because of schedule times, I'd like you to comment at this point, Elvira, and then we'll continue after. I think you're muted.
There we are.
Yes.
Thank you, Maestro. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I am most privileged and honored to share anything Sylvia Olden Lee. And I agree with everything that Dennis has said about those of us who have lived and worked among her, with her. Here's the one thing that I want everybody to pay attention to whenever you have an opportunity to watch Mrs. Lee. Not only is she singing to Maestro Dennis as Bill Warfield was singing, that is, Mrs. Lee has lived through every one of these spirituals in her own soul. Not only learning different arrangements, which, as you notice, and I'm sure Maestro Dennis noticed, did not one time look up at any piece of paper. But when she is reading from a piece of paper, as she did the first song she sang with Robert McFerrin, she played with Robert McFerrin, even if Mr. McFerrin were not able to voice the words, Mrs. Lee voiced the words and the meaning of the piece through her piano playing. So those of you who would wish to spend some time with her and her supreme artistry, turn off the sound of the voice if you can and sing with the piano playing. She was just one of the very, very few people that I know who could sing with the piano as though it were a 110-piece orchestra with her 10 fingers. The other thing that I really, really am so humbly grateful and pleased for has been the opportunity to work with her through all of my music, but especially with the Negro Spiritual. And what I am also always happy to hear is when the singer is not on a time clock, because Ms. Lee would always say, if you cannot express how the words make you feel, then you should not sing that song. So Everett, in his wonderful style, expressed the words so beautifully, because they're not just words on a piece of paper. It is a meaning of life. Each one of those songs, from Mr. Warfield, from Mr. McFerrin, even the young lady in the beginning who was a little reticent about letting loose, shall we say, began to understand that the feeling that you represent, that you sing, is what represents what the song means. And all of those years of working with Mrs. Lee, as I should say, not just with the spirituals, but with anything from all the classical genre, the art songs, even things that she was not familiar with. I did the Dorothy Rodmore's From the Dark Tower, 8 wonderful songs of poems by Black poets. She said to me, "Oh, I can't play this." And I said, "Miss Lee, that doesn't even sound like you." She managed to work that with me. And at the time of the performance of 4 of the pieces, I didn't need to put the music in front of her. That's how incredibly endowed Miss Lee was. And I am sure that all of us who speak of her and speak of the performance of these Negro spirituals mean that it isn't just a group of songs that you stand up and sing, that you bring to life the essence of the singing of it through the words. As Mrs. Lee would say, tell me again how the words make you feel. And if you were not true to how the words make you feel, guess who would call you on it? And she would say, well, you're not convincing me. You could be standing up there with a bologna sandwich in your hand and it would have the same effect. So let's go back and tell me how the words make you feel. So that is my offering. I will try to come back. I will try to come back to the meeting within the next 20 minutes. But thank you all for giving me just these moments. I just got to go vote on a project and then come right back. Thank you, Maestro Dennis. Thank you, Diane. I hope to be back.
Oh yeah, we hope you come back. That's good. All right, so Diane, I think what we ought to do is go to Bob Wilson at this point. We do have some other things which we'll be able to add in, and since Elvira will be back, we'll try to save some of those until she shows up again.
Sure, that's good. Let me just say, depending on how everything goes, we can take some questions, but we would ask that you write them in the chat, and you can direct them to people or you can send them to everyone so we can all figure out things that we want to address. And I think we'll be here, so Elvira will be able to join us again. But so Robert Wilson, the wonderful pianist and organist and director and composer and arranger who I was speaking of earlier, is here. And I think we aren't going to get to see his face.
I'd like to suggest something at this point, since we've been talking about Sylvia, and we're fortunate enough to have Gregory with us today. I would like to suggest that we hear from Gregory now, because he spent so many years working with Sylvia, and it would be really interesting. I have not heard his story around that myself, and I would really like to hear about it. You know, his experiences with her. And I'd be glad to defer my presentation until our next session, since we're sort of on a 90-minute constraint here, as far as I know.
I think,
let's hear from Gregory. I would really like that.
I would love to hear from Gregory, and I don't think we have to get rid of your presentation for this meeting. In fact, people can indicate, I guess, in the reactions, or if people have to leave, they can leave.
Yeah, have people vote on it.
Well, mine is going to be about a half hour, so I would just as soon, wait if that's the thing, because you want to give time for questions and answers, and I really would love to hear from Gregory since he's with us. We're very lucky to have him. He's not always available, so maybe we could do that at this point, if that's okay with everybody.
What Gregory has to say about it, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
Dr. Hopkins, are you there somewhere?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Although I was not prepared to participate in an active way, I was very excited to participate passively and hear what some of my colleagues have to say about the art of the spirituals. In addition to what I have already heard, I would just like to add that the spirituals come from a profoundly deep religious spiritual experience. And although we do look for our interpretations of these spirituals to be moving and animated, we have to guard against making a caricature of the spirituals. They have to come from a very, very deep and sincere place, as the original spirituals came from. They have to touch the innermost part of the performer in order to touch the innermost part of the hearer. And I just guard against making so much of the activity in the spirituals that we don't pay attention to what it is that we want, as Elvira said, what it is that we want the audience members to experience as a result of our performance. That's my 2 cents, and I'm out of here.
All right, well, we'll take more sense from you later if you have it, but I think we'll go ahead to
give me just a second because my phone is about to run out of juice. And I'm trying to plug in my charger cord here.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, let me ask Gregory a question which he might be inclined to answer. Greg, would you say something a bit about your own experience with Sylvia, also just in terms of the coaching element of it? That might be very useful for some of the singers who are on, particularly people that didn't have a chance, as did some of us, to work directly with her.
Well, I will say that Mrs. Lee was one of the brightest people that I have ever met, one of the smartest, one of the most knowledgeable people that I have ever met, and not only with regard to music. Mrs. Lee stopped everything on a daily basis in order to tune into Jeopardy. That was her favorite pastime. And as I sat in her apartment with her many times playing along with Jeopardy, she would have the answers right before the participants or the contestants did. So she knew a lot about a lot of different things in addition to music. There were probably 25 opera scores that she could play from beginning to end without having a sheet of music in her hand, and probably double that number of spirituals that she had right at the tip of her fingers. I'm sitting in my living room adjacent to the piano that I have, which is largely due to Mrs. Lee. She was a very, very thrifty person. As one of the Golden's girls used to say, you want to call her frickin' frugal. Mrs. Lee didn't like to waste money. And she and I both bought our pianos on the same day from the same house sale. Someone was vacating a house, and the contents of it, in which there were 2 pianos in this very house. Ms. Lee also loved to play Scrabble. She insisted that if you were going to play a game or waste your time, you ought to be trying to learn something while you were doing it. I remember a story that Eve told when we celebrated Mrs. Lee's centennial. And Eve let us in on the fact that she and her mother often challenged each other to Scrabble matches. And Eve, having been raised for the early part of her life in Germany, where Mrs. Lee and Everett Lee were for Fulbright scholarships, was brought up in an atmosphere where German was the primary language, maybe not in their home, but Eve eventually would become the German language translator for the Christian Science Monitor. So she said, I've got a way that I'm going to get at my mom. We're going to get the German edition of Scrabble, and I know I will be able to beat her at that. And of course, she was not able to beat her mom, even at German Scrabble. Mrs. Lee was for getting to the essence of what the music was trying to say. She would oftentimes say, forget about your voice. Nobody cares about that. But people want to know how you made them feel as the music generated from your body. This is what Mrs. Lee stood for. People will forget a lot of things, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Okay. Thank you, Gregory.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. So Diane, how's Bob doing?
I'm all right. I've got my thing plugged in now, so I'm all right. I won't run out of juice.
Great.
Good. So I think it's fine for you to go ahead and tell people what you'd like to tell them.
Okay. John suggested that I begin with a little bit of my own experience. I wasn't going to bother with that, but I maybe that's not so bad an idea. When I was about 6 years old, back in the mid-50s, my parents and my brother and I, every Sunday evening, would watch a program on NBC when we were having our little picnic lunch in the living room. And it was called Wide, Wide World with David Garroway. And I remember at the age of 6 that he had a program which was commemorating the 100th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And there was a little lady that came on. She must have been about 103. And she was one of the last people that were still alive from that time. And she couldn't have been more than 10 or 12 at that time. And when she talked about, the tremendous joy there was when the Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation, and then she talked about how heartbroken everybody was when he was killed. And all during her story, they were playing, I might have heard City Called Heaven that day. I know it was, all the old spirituals in the background. And she had me at hello. I'm telling you, I was so moved, as, even though I was just a young little fellow. And somehow I knew that I was going to be connected with the African American people in my life. And I went to elementary school that year, and we were in one room, all 8 grades in one room, and we had people of every race, and we all loved each other and got along. We never thought about it, it was just natural. And in Sabbath school, I was in the primary Sabbath school class, and every week there was a lady, Mrs. Johns, who had a lot of interesting different things that were keeping our attention. But one of the things was a big felt easel, and she had the faces of the world on it, little children of the world. And we would sing every week, and this went on for 2 years while I was in that class. Red and yellow, black and white, all are precious in his sight. And our church was that way too. We had people of every race, Asians, West Indians, black people, white people. We had a Jewish family and a family that was formerly an officer in the German army. And, we just all got along. We loved each other. And I'm very grateful for that early life that I had. By the time I got to college, I went to Hart College of Music. I got a job, my first real job in Faith Congregational Church in Hartford, Connecticut. And I decided I wanted to find out everything I could about the spirituals. And I went to New York, and I looked up in the old Carl Fisher store and places like that, where you could go through hundreds and hundreds of drawers of choral music.
I found every spiritual I could lay my hands on from all the five, the big five, and got them and brought them back to Hartford. And then I started ordering for the library there and so on. And the thing that impressed me, and I only heard William Dawson's words for the first time this evening that Dennis was reading, and I was so moved by that. Or was it Diane, whoever read that? Anyway, I was so moved because I came to the same conclusion as a young man. I looked through the spirituals, and you can feel the pain and the tragedy and the exhaustion and the joy and the strength. But what you never find anywhere is anger and hate. And I was so impressed with that. I said, this is a lesson book for the ages. I said, this is a triumph of civilization, I said to myself. And I was just so inspired by it. And I said, I decided I wanted to do as much as I could to bring that music back and before the public, you know. So anyway, in preparation for today, I thought about who of the five do I know the least about, and I decided it was Nathaniel Dett. So as I started looking into his life, I was amazed and excited and inspired by all that I found out. And then I started listening. I went to YouTube and just typed in music of Nathaniel Dett, and I came up with this enormous catalog of recordings of his works, including an oratorio, The Ordering of Moses, and which is about an hour long, and other instrumental works as well as spirituals and plain instrument, you know, solo pieces and solo vocal pieces, and choral music, wonderful choral music. Some of it was arrangements of spirituals and some of it was original compositions. There's just a wealth of material there, and so much of it I had never heard before, and I was just amazed. Anyway, I'd like to very quickly, and John Chaldone is going to make available for everybody who is participating today the wonderful encyclopedic article on Wikipedia that there is about Nathaniel Dett and his life and music. And I want to just quickly go through, you know, a few high points about that. But most of what I want to do is to let you hear some of this music that I discovered. He was born in Drummondville, Ontario, now part of Niagara Falls, Ontario, to Charlotte and Robert T. Dett. They were descended from escaped slaves who traveled north. His mother was a native of Drummondville, which is now, as I said, part of Niagara Falls. And his father was from the United States. This will be interesting to Diane and Dennis. His mother directed him to study poetry, Shakespeare, Longfellow, Tennyson, and commit passages to memory when he was a child. He started piano lessons around that time at the age of 5. And he studied at the Oliver Willis Halstead Conservatory of Music from the age of 19 to 21. Then he continued his studies at Lockport Conservatory and then went to Oberlin Conservatory, where he first encountered the idea of incorporating spirituals into classical musical forms. He heard the music of Dvorak, a Czech composer who had toured the United States and incorporated elements of American music in his own work, including the New World Symphony. He was also influenced by the composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who composed a set of, well, anyway, that's all right. He attained the Bachelor of Music degree from Oberlin and was the first Black American to complete that degree at Oberlin in 1908. And he studied composition and piano there. And then he went touring as a concert pianist during this period. And he performed and concluded by performing at Carnegie Hall and the Chicago Music Hall. And then he went to teach at Tennessee's Lane College, followed by a tenure at Lincoln Institute in Jefferson City, Missouri. And at that time issued the first piano composition called In the Bottoms, and it's a suite of pieces actually, in 1913. He was the first Black director of music at the Hampton Institute, where he maintained the position from 1913 to 1932, almost 20 years, and founded during that time the Hampton Choral Union, Musical Arts Society, Hampton Institute Choir, and he started the School of Music there, which is now a regular part of their program. His awards, I'm going to try to go forward a little bit here. I don't want to take too much time at this. He was his piece Magnolia was performed at the Samuel Coleridge Taylor Club in 1914. On June 3rd that year, he performed Magnolia and In the Bottoms, which is also a suite. And the Chicago Evening Post reported that his works were the most innovative and praised at his high level of piano skills. He married on December 27, 1916, Helen Elise Smith. She was the first Black graduate of the Institute of Musical Art in New York City, which became known as the Juilliard School. In 1918, Det wrote of his compositional goals. This is interesting. We have this wonderful store of folk music, the melodies of an enslaved people. But we must treat it in such manner that it can be presented in choral form, in lyric and operatic works, in concertos and suites and salon music, and fashion from it music which will prove that we too have national feelings and characteristics. And there's more to that. I've abbreviated what that part of it. But anyway, he continued to study music, and including at the American Conservatory, Columbia University, Northwestern University, the University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard. Each summer he attended major national institutions. In 1919, he founded the Musical Arts Society, which organized concerts with artists such as Marian Anderson, Harry T. Burleigh, Percy Granger, Roland Hayes, Sousa, and Clarence Cameron White. We have to do something about Roland Hayes, by the way, in the future. He was very significant in the history of Black music. He received from the Belgian Royal Society the Palm and Ribbon Award. From 1920 to 21, he attended Harvard University, where he studied with Arthur Foote, winning 2 prizes. Don't Be Weary Traveler, a choral composition, won the Francis Booth Award, and his essay, The Emancipation of Negro Music, won the Baldwin Prize. Anyway, let's see here how I can skip ahead a little bit. He earned the master's degree from the Eastman School of Music in Rochester in 1932. In 1929, Det traveled to France to study at the Fontainebleau School of Music with composer Nadia Boulanger.
After resigning in 1933 from the Hansen Institute, he served as the choral conductor for Stromberg Carlson's NBC radio broadcasts. He wrote the oratorio, and this is quite impressive, The Ordering of Moses in 1937. It was conducted by Eugene Goossens on May 7th, 1937, with a chorus of 350 and the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra at the Cincinnati May Festival in Ohio. Then he served as visiting director of music from 37 to 42 at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. With its chorus, he toured across Canada and the United States. They performed on CBS radio broadcasts, and so on. Let me just read one more thing about him, and then we'll get to the music selections if there's still time. I realize I've probably taken more than I should have. I've already.
That's fine. Read the one more thing, and let's hear some of the music. Go ahead.
Yeah, he got an honorary doctorate. He was awarded from Howard University in 1924, and was awarded an honorary doctorate from Oberlin in 1926. I urge all of you listening to look at that total article. It's absolutely wonderful to read all of the things that he did in his life. He was just a great, great man. And so now we come to the music selections. Is there still time?
Yes.
Okay. The first one, I don't know how this got by me. After 39 years in New York as a professional accompanist and coach, no one ever brought this to me. And I thought, how did I miss this? This is unbelievable. This is just Nathaniel Dett's arrangement of Ride On Jesus. And it's wonderful. And I never heard it anywhere before last night. So I think you'll all be delighted. It's about 1 minute and 37 seconds. And the soprano singing it does a wonderful job. So let's have that right now.
Ride on Jesus, ride on Jesus, ride on conquering King. I want to go to heaven in the morning. Ride on Jesus, ride on Jesus, ride on conquering King. I want to go to heaven in the morning. If you see my mother, oh yes, just tell her for me, oh yes. For me tomorrow in Galilee, want to go to heaven in the morning. If you see my father, oh yes, just tell him for me, oh yes. For me tomorrow in Galilee, want to go to heaven in the morning. Oh, ride on Jesus, ride on Jesus, ride on conquering King. Wanna go to heaven in the morning, wanna go to heaven in the morning. If you see John the Baptist, just tell him for me, tomorrow in Galilee. I want to go to heaven in the
Yeah, maybe Gregory or Elvira might recognize that, but I don't know how that got by me all these years. I never heard it, and I think it's just delightful. Anyway, the next one is a choral arrangement of Deep River, and here again, never heard it before, never saw it in print, but here it is. So we can listen to that now.
want to go, Lord, I want to cross over into Canterbury. Lord, I want to cross over into Canterbury. Lord, I want to cross over into Canterbury.
Good.
Bob,
Now, yeah.
for time reasons, maybe how many you just have?
Well, I was just thinking to let go of the two instrumental pieces that I wanted people to hear. I will just mention them, but I think we can let those go. I have one other spiritual, but I can even let that go if necessary. It's "O Holy Lord," and that's the next piece that I had in mind for now. I don't know how much time do we want to.
I think Dennis had some more material, so maybe if you want to say a couple other things, and then we can come back to those if there's time, or as it looks like enough material for any more presentations.
All right, so the pieces that I would encourage everybody to listen to that you're not going to hear today are two piano pieces by Det, and you can see them on YouTube as part of the list. One is called His Song, and then the other one is the Barcarolle of Tears from 8 Bible vignettes. His Song is from In the Bottoms, I think it is. It's bottom land is like swampland, I guess. Anyway, they're absolutely marvelous, and they're also based on African American material. It's unmistakable when you hear them both, and they're just absolutely gorgeous writing. And I really want everybody to experience that aspect of Nathaniel Dett. The third spiritual that I had in mind to listen to today is "O Holy Lord," and maybe we'll get to do it before the end. And then the final excerpt is an original composition for choir. It's called "Jesus, Son of Mary." I don't think it's really a spiritual, but it is absolutely beautifully constructed. In fact, it has a fugal section in it, 4-part fugue, but it is so expressive and so gorgeous. And you can see that he has absolute mastery of the materials of composition. He was a great, great musician. And I guess that's where we'll end it for right now and go on to whatever Dennis wants to present.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing, because the Dett, if you think about what Dvorak took as his mission, which was to create, as he said, a great and noble school of classical composition, that the spirituals were in a sense, the key to that. But then the development of this music, the inspiration that it unleashed, and unfortunately, due to many factors, we never got to fully blossom, but I think these pieces are really reflective of that. So I really want to thank you for bringing this to everyone's attention. Oh, Greg has something. He wants to say something. Go ahead, Gregory.
I was just checking in the chat, and regarding Bob Wilson's contribution, there was a question regarding the Big Five. So if you would elaborate on that, please, Mr. Wilson.
Well, the story that I got from Edward Boatner when I was 28 years old and came to New York for the first time to work as an adult, I got a job. Somebody gave me his name. I think it was Ted Hodges, or gave him my name, I should say. And I went to work playing for rehearsals for Edward Boatner. He had a studio on West 69th Street, just off of Columbus Avenue. And I used to go there 2 or 3 times a week to play for him. And he told me at that time that he was one of 5 students that went into Dvorak's school that he started downtown in Manhattan. And that building that they were in was a brownstone building, which was there until about 10 years ago when NYU decided to put up a high-rise. They owned the property and they tore it down and put up a high-rise. And it's really a shame, because there, you know, it was nice to still have that to look at, but that's gone. But anyway, the 5 were Harry T. Burleigh, of course, Det himself, Boatner, William Dawson, and Hall Johnson. Those were the 5. And that was the generation that were grandchildren of the original slave generation, or the people that were, let's say, emancipated in the Civil War period. And they heard from their grandparents. All of them heard from their grandparents the songs that were sung in the old times. And after them came people like Florence Price and Margaret Bonds, and the Johnson brothers were maybe of similar age. They just were independent of the 5, but James Weldon and Rosamond Johnson, they published one of the earliest collections of spirituals that I've seen, and Gregory has that because I referred to it several times. When I came to do the orchestration of my Deep River, which Barbara Conrad never used, but we did play it on the concert that was recorded live for her album. I found material that they had included in their setting of Deep River, which I had never seen or heard anywhere else. And so I was very grateful for that. But, you know, then we have Carter and people that come after that. But the Big 5, they were the grandchildren of the emancipated people from the Civil War time. So they are about as close to the tradition as you can get that actually went into print, that were not just transmitted by ear.
Gregory's waving. Go ahead.
Is he muted?
He's still muted, but I think
we have to go through a few steps to get unmuted. But we might want to include Jester Hairston in that number. Many of you might not know that name, but he was the Raleigh in the television series, saying, and credited for what we know as Amen.
Oh yeah, that's right. He lived to be about 100 years old, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. I think Dennis has some more things to present, and then we can open it up some more for discussion.
Well, let me also just say that I think what we should try to do is, if we can, get back to some of the things that Bob mentioned, particularly that last part of piece from Nathaniel Dett that he referenced. I think that would be really important for people to hear. And really, in terms of what I have, the additional things, I want to say a few things about how this project began, because it was in April of 1993, April 8th of 1993 to be exact. We were at Carnegie Hall. We were doing our now famous demonstration on registration and tuning, and was at the Cami Hall. We had about 300 people there, and Carlo Berganzi was on the stage with a series of singers, and we were showing the difference between singing at A440 and A432. And in the intermission, we got the news that Marian Anderson had passed away. So what happened was that at the conclusion of that day, I spoke with Carlo Berganzi. Actually, I sent him a question, but we weren't able to get to it during the back and forth about the fact that she had passed away, what should be done in her honor. And he said, well, what you have to do is what she did. So since he said that, of course, that could have appeared to be paradoxical, but what that meant to us was, well, let's figure out what that would mean and how we could do it. And that's how we were caused to discover Sylvia Olden Lee. You know how people talk about discovering things, whether you're talking about America or other things, right? Things are there all the time, but you know, suddenly they become discoveries for you because there's some necessity that you find yourself confronted by. And so that's what happened. Sylvia, of course, had achieved some notoriety because of her appearance in a video with Wynton Marsalis and Kathleen Battle. And so we began talking to her, and it was her efforts and the efforts of the great George Shirley, without whom actually that concert that we gave in May 29th, I believe it was in 1993, never would have occurred. That concert included many people who sang there, Robert McFerrin being one of the people. That's where we first heard Robert McFerrin. That was after his stroke. And George was also there. And we did an interview with George right afterwards, in which his point was, the point of emphasis was, the identity of the spiritual and classical lead. He said that these, yes, there are formal differences. We were talking particularly about Schubert. And there was an extensive discussion we had about that. And he caused me to realize something I had not realized until that point. I also should say about this entirety that it was something that had been being discussed with me by Helga LaRouche for a couple of years prior to this, because the issue was, why was there no sense of oppression in the spirituals themselves? What she said particularly about it was, you know, when I hear these, I don't hear any sense of oppression, because as Roland Carter could tell you, particularly during the 1960s, the big slander against the spirituals was that they were slave songs. And that's why militant Black nationalist types, including myself, didn't want to have anything to do with them. But that actually had nothing to do with the real content of the music. And so what I just want to say about this as a whole, Gregory, we got to know at that point. Elvira, we got to know at that point. Other singers who have often worked with us, Valerie Eichelberger, Kahembe, many others. So the project has changed, developed at different times. What we're going to do here is show something which again came out of that, and this is Bill Warfield and Sylvia, who were well, this was I think 2003, it may be, not quite sure if it's 2002 or 2003, but this is James Weldon Johnson's "Go Down Death" from God's Trombones, which was Johnson's attempts to capture the character of Black preaching, which he had done a set of settings of, and it's followed, you'll see, it goes directly into Going Home. And so the notion there was recitative and aria. And then what will follow that will be Robert McFerrin, accompanied by Raymond Jackson. And this is Ride on King Jesus. This is a commemoration also of Marian Anderson, her appearance at Constitution Hall. And this concert was given on August 28th of 1993, which was the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington. But we did it at Constitution Hall and had about 3,300 people in that audience. So that's what we're going to watch at this point.
not. Weep not. She's not dead. She's resting in the bosom of Jesus. Heartbroken husband, weep no more. Grief-stricken son, weep no more. Left lonesome daughter, weep no more. She's only just gone home. Day before yesterday morning, God was looking down from his great high heaven, looking down on all his children. And his eye fell on Sister Caroline, tossing on her bed of pain. And God's big heart was touched with pity, with the everlasting pity. And God sat back on his throne, and he commanded that tall, bright angel standing at his right hand, "Call me Death." That tall, bright angel cried in a voice that broke like a clap of thunder, "Call death! Call death!" And the echo sounded down the streets of heaven till it reached way back to that shadowy place where death waits with his pale white horse. And death heard the summons, and he leaped on his fastest horse, pale as a sheet in the moonlight. Up the golden street death galloped, and the hoofs of his horses struck fire from the gold, but they didn't make no sound. Up death rode to the great white throne and waited for God's command. And God said, "Go down, death, go down. Go down to Savannah, Georgia, down in Yamacraw, and find Sister Caroline. She's borne the burden in the heat of the day. She's labored long in my vineyard, and she's tired. She's weary. Go down, Death, and bring her to me." Death didn't say a word. He loosed the reins on his pale white horse, and he clamped the spurs to his bloodless sides, and out and down he rode through heaven's pearly gates, past suns and moons and stars. On Death rode, and the foam from his horse was like a comet in the sky. On Death rode, leaving the lightning flash behind. Straight on down he came. While we were watching round her bed, she turned her eyes and looked away. She saw what we couldn't see. She saw old Death. She saw old Death coming like a falling star. But Death didn't frighten Sister Caroline. He looked to her like a welcome friend, and she whispered to us, "I'm going home." And she smiled and closed her eyes. And Death took her up like a baby, and she lay in his icy arms, but she didn't feel no chill. And Death began to ride again, up beyond the evening star, out beyond the morning star into the glittering light of glory, onto the great white throne. And there he laid Sister Caroline on the loving breast of Jesus. And Jesus took his own hands and wiped away her tears, and he smoothed the furrows from her face. And the angels sang a little song. Jesus rocked her in his arms and kept her saying, "Take your rest, take your rest, take your rest. Weep not, weep not. She's not dead. She's resting in the bosom of Jesus." Just going home, quiet like some still day. I'm just going home.
It's not far, just close by, through an open door. Work all done, cares laid by, going to fear no more. Mother's there expecting me, Father's waiting too. Lots of folk gathered there, all the friends I know. All the friends I know. I'm going home. Nothing lost, all's gain. No more fret nor pain. No more stumbling on the way. No more longing for the day. Going to roam no more. Morning star lights the way, restless dream all dawn. Shadows gone, break of day, real life just begun. There's no break, ain't no end, just a living on, wide awake with a smile, going on and on. Just going home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. I'm just going home. Going home.
He is King of kings, He is Lord of lords. Jesus Christ, the first and last, no man works like Him, for He is King of kings, He is Lord of lords. Jesus Christ, the first and last, no man works like Him. King Jesus rides a milk white horse, no man works like Him. The river journey David crossed, no man works like Him, for He is King of kings, Lord our Lord. Oh, Jesus Christ, the first and last. Oh, King Jesus rides in the middle of the air. Oh, He calls the saints from everywhere. Oh, run on, King Jesus. No man can hinder me. Run on, King Jesus. Run on. No man can hinder me. He is the King. He is the Lord. He is a King, He's a Lord. Oh, Jesus Christ, the first and last, and no man works like Him. Ride on, ride on, ride on, ride on, Jesus.
Well, Elvira, I hope you're there. The only thing I'd like to pose for you and Gregory, particularly others that want to say talk about it, is this. This is a case of real immortality. And the idea of how art transcends the moment. When you have a great artist, the ability to communicate something about everybody, which is eternal and is above any of us. And I just like you, if you have, I mean, that's just my reflection, but you may have some reflections on this. And we might, a couple people might not be muted. Don't know, Jose, if you can deal with that. But Elvira, if you would say something, that'd be good.
Okay. Okay. I just got back on, and so I was trying to let my left ear hear this and my right ear vote. So I'm not really, I need to ask you, Dennis, the statement that you just made in reference to how I should respond. Can you do that again to a point?
Yeah, sure. It's very simple. I mean, people that heard what just happened. I mean, obviously, when Bill Warfield gave that performance, he was already very ill. I don't think that was probably about 8 months before he died, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
And all of that is in one sense in evidence, but at the same time, what he does in that performance shows that the performance is beyond just the voice, beyond the simple ideas of technique, all of that. Something else is what the art actually consists of. And I think you see that.
Okay, yes, I am there, as we have been saying. So I can truly attest to the fact that when the person who has been endowed with that gift of sharing their life in music as a presenter, as a performer, as a minister of the music, minister of the words, that does not have a timeline on it, which is why the Bill Warfields and the Bob McFerrin's and the Sylvia Odenlees, and you name them. All of those people are still very much present, because as each of us is continuing to exist on this planet, we are called upon to continue what our forebears gave us through their gift, through their talent, through their artistry. And I find myself, for instance, talking to my students or my clients, and it is always, you know, Miss Lee used to say, or Miss Lee said. I remember the 2 weeks that before she passed, and how Gregory really, really, really just literally moved in. I had spoken with her that Sunday before on the telephone in Philadelphia, and she said to me, I've been singing, seems like my time ain't long. And I said, oh, Miss Lee. She says, oh, don't say, oh, Miss Lee. She said, that's the song I feel like singing. So even though she 2 weeks later had left us, she was so strong in her passion, in her life, in her conviction, that she did not focus. And being a student of science as well, Christian Science, her focus was not on, okay, I'm getting ready to leave this planet. Her focus was still on, I am breathing in, so I am offering. Bill Warfield did the exact same thing. And I was trying to remember this young man who called Bill Warfield. So many of the young men, for them, Bill Warfield was their father, surrogate musical father. And they always, even to this day when we chat, they always bring up these soldiers, shall we say, or as a gentleman said to me one day, these Marines who gave us something that we too must carry on. And that's why I'm so passionate about, and I don't like using that word, but anyway, about young people in the arts, especially the multi-ethnic people. Gregory Lawrence Craig, that's who I'm talking about, yes. Because the young people these days have so much more to deal with, but the essence of the material and information that we carry in us came from the essence of what the Sylvia Lees and those persons carry. And we must talk more about this. We must engage more. Or as Ms. Lee used to do, we must grab them by the arm and say, get here. I always talk about how Ms. Lee called me and said, I don't want to know where you are or what you're doing, but I'm in Chicago, get here. And I said to her, well, what's going on in Chicago? She says, get on a plane and get here. That was my introduction to the National Association of Negro Musicians. So we are called upon to remember the charge that have been put on us and be willing to move that along. And let me just say once more, the names of those persons that we heard today, 20 years from now, as I reach my age, we're going to be talking and listening to those very same people. We're going to be talking back to the first this or the first African-American that and the Negro Spiritual, because that's who we are and that's what we bring to our generation. So I'm forever grateful to still be breathing in and out in the time that those persons were living, all the way from Hall Johnson to I got to see the end of Mr. Dawson and his life, to Mr. Boatner and those persons. I mean, I am there and I don't mind saying it because it gives me great joy to be able to share it. So that's what my mission still is in this life, is to share the essence and the humanity of the Negro Spiritual. The word, Miss Lee, as she would always say, was it Beethoven on his dying bed that said, don't forget the words. And she was truly about the words.
Yeah, Gregory.
Elvira, thank you so much for that wonderful lead in. And as a disciple of course, Christ and Mrs. Lee, secondly, I have to say that it's just such a tremendous testament to say that even after Mrs. Lee's physical body, after William Dawson's physical body, after Bill Warfield's physical bodies are in the grave, we are still talking about what they said. And that means that their living was not in vain, which I sang for the memorial service. Well, was it a memorial service? Black History service that we had at St. Bart. It's so wonderful to know that generations after these people have passed their earthly life, we're still talking about what they gave, what they said, what they sang, what they did while they walked in this terrestrial plane. And it's up to those of us that remain to keep singing their songs so that the generations will have a melody to cling on to.
Thank you, Gregory. Diane, I guess you have a few people that wanted to say a few things. Is that the case? Or actually, do you have anything to say also?
I do. I'll let Fred Haight go ahead. If he's able to unmute himself.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am drawn back to a presentation that I had with my friend Dennis Speed a couple of years ago, where he said something that shocked people. He said that perhaps Brahms and Dvorak identified the United States as the new center for the classical tradition. And I saw eyes roll. There were many people on the podium with us who were sympathetic, but their eyes rolled when they saw that. They were thinking, well, wait a minute, the classical tradition of teaching in music was so much more advanced in Europe. But Dennis was getting at something, which is that the classical tradition draws upon humanity, and that Brahms and Dvorak may well have recognized that that capability had disappeared in Europe, and that it was to be found in the United States in its fight for human freedom and equality. And so I just wish to bring that up in the idea that this may actually have been what guided Brahms and Dvorak in their founding of a classical school of composition upon the spiritual.
Well, I can say something about that in response. Let's remember that when Dvorak arrived in America in 1892, Czechoslovakia was still subjugated. He was very connected to that. And in his own musical compositions, including things like his Seventh Symphony, he was responding to things that he had seen in that form of oppression. Besides that, his relationship to Harry Burleigh, very important one, because of Burleigh's singing the various songs to him, but also telling him the stories, because remember that Burleigh's grandfather had been a conductor on the Underground Railroad. You also have Brahms's own interest in the American circumstance, which you hear in the second piano concerto, the reference to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And so these people did not see the great causes of freedom as separate. They just understood that as artists, the way that they could relate to them is by perfecting their art and making or appropriating in some cases just trying to reproduce the same character of what they heard. But it was all one thing. I think the most important thing that I got from the experience of Sylvia and the others during that period, because it was a very interesting time when we intersected them. It happened to be the 100th anniversary of the National Conservatory of Music of Jeanette Thurber, Dvorak, Harry Burleigh, who had done that project in 1892 to 95. And so when we intersected Sylvia and George Shirley and others, we had just done our work on the registration and tuning. By the way, there do exist some classes from that time, and one in particular where George Shirley commented extensively on the favorable and positive effect of the adjusted tuning of the 432, what we call the true tuning with the human voice. But I just referenced this from the standpoint that as a whole, this whole tradition of beauty creating freedom is really a specific form in America of something that had been true throughout time. But it was not an artistic question, it was a spiritual question, and therefore an artistic question. So I think what Gregory said about this in particular gets at the essence, the problem involved. You can't perform these songs if you don't believe them. What King demonstrated, not merely in the case of 1963, but probably, at least for me, more powerfully on April 3rd, 68, when from the beginning of that speech, he makes it very clear, I know my life is threatened, but mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And it's made very clear from the beginning of the speech, where he says, if I were standing at the beginning of space and time, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, in what age would you like to live? That's the first thing that King says at the beginning of that speech. And then when he gets to the end about I've been to the mountaintop, it's a singular composition. Remember, it's all extemporaneous. And it's very much like the principle that we're seeing and expressing here in the spirituals, but it's every time an artist has to perform, a great artist, they are doing what King did. And as Marian Anderson was very famous for, I mean, she never made political statements, but what was that thing at the Lincoln Memorial? I mean, what can you say about that? What did that make happen? How did she then end up singing for Eisenhower's inauguration in 57 and Kennedy's inauguration in 61 and the March on Washington? It was the power of the art itself. So I think they certainly recognized that. They wanted to help the process in America. They had experienced the Fisk singers. They had come to Europe. They come to Germany. They come to Czechoslovakia as well. So, but that I think is a valid hypothesis to pursue.
I have a couple of thoughts, and I think perhaps we should bring things to a close and plan another event as well. And there's some musical things that I'd like us to hear at the end. But one, in terms of the time that we're in, which has been extremely difficult with the social distancing, to go back to one of Dawson's comments that this music was not individual. It came from a group, or there was, and you have a sense of, I mean, really when the chorus is at its best, there's a quality of that, which is really something. You're breathing together, you're speaking together, you are conscious of yourself as part of a whole, part of a universal whole. And one of the things that's been really devastating about this time, we already have a very atomized and heteronomic society. People have talked about the fact that young people often don't really have friends. I mean, friends that you actually see and go do things with anymore. You have a peer group on Facebook of people you don't even know, or what their intention might be toward you, or if they're a bot or something else. So I think this process of choral singing is really, really crucial and should not be taken for granted. And I do want to make a plug, since we have this, I guess we're making a silk purse out of a sow's ear here, since our chorus is on Zoom. Anybody anywhere in the world, wherever you are, you may join it. And if you're in a different time zone, we have rehearsals. Our Boston chorus rehearses on Tuesday evenings. The Manhattan chorus rehearses on Thursday evenings. There's a spiritual rehearsal on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern time. But our rehearsals, which are on Zoom, are also recorded. And given that we're not in person, actually going through a recorded rehearsal is almost like being there, as oddly as it may seem. So I'd like to encourage everybody to join the chorus, also to visit the website to sign up to get our emails, to donate to the chorus. It's a 501c3, so we appreciate donations. And do you have more? Because I have a specific way that I'd like to conclude the program, but I don't want to do it if someone else has something more they want to say, and then I'll say it. Okay, well, here's what I'd like to do, Jose, if you have it. I'd like us to hear that incredible Nathaniel Dett piece that Bob Wilson told us about, Jesus, Son of Mary. And then following that, we're going to hear the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus sing the Burleigh, H.T. Burleigh, My Lord, What a Morning, which we performed in 2016 on the 15th anniversary of 9/11. So that will be the final musical offering concluding the program. And before that, I just want to, again, now that we've been through this arc, repeat what Mr. LaRouche had said at the end of this Politics as Art paper, because I think the spirituals are so important also for Americans in particular, because they are poetry and they're in English. Again, this reminder, he writes, in such matters, what you think you are saying and the manner in which you say it may not agree. That should worry you. Therefore, you should refresh yourself, bathe your soul in classical poetry and song, that your mind might become better attuned and habituated to communicating in that relatively well-performed mode which classical art forms exemplify for your guidance. On this account, there is a precious lesson to be learned by all citizens and other residents of the United States, especially those oppressed by the ruinous policy trends of the past 35 years, from, among relevant other sources, the polished form of what is called the Negro Spiritual. So with that, I'd like to really thank everyone, and now we may listen to those two pieces. So that concludes our program. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Elvira Green, Gregory Hopkins, Robert Wilson, Dennis Speed, Everett Settle, and thank you to Sylvia Lee and Bill Warfield, and Helga and Lyndon LaRouche. And join the chorus, don't forget. Bye.